SIGA's inaugural Sport Integrity Week, presented by MasterCard. My name is Ben Jacobs. I'm your MC for the week, and the aim of the next 5 days is to discuss and debate pressing issues of integrity in sport. We'll have panels and socially distant fireside chats on a range of different topics, including crime, corruption, safeguarding, and piracy. We encourage you to ask questions via the conference app and engage with us on social media. Use the hashtag SIW. There really is, of course, no excuse in this COVID-19 era. All you have to do is dial in, potentially still in your pajamas, and put your thoughts directly to a range of key industry leaders. Now, during the course of the week, we'll also be fundraising for various SIGA causes. You may well see a Q code flash up periodically for those wanting our Eventbrite link. And the URL for that is also on our social handles too. You can find it in the bio section. The cool thing about the fundraising is you also get to vote exactly how the money is distributed and thus help shape our strategy. Go to that URL and you will find more details. Now, our first panel is on representation in the boardroom. That's at 11 o'clock GMT, 12 CET. But before all of that right now, we have a media conference to showcase SIGA's recommendations on race, gender, diversity, and inclusion in sport. Brian Lewis has been leading our task force on race, gender, diversity, and inclusion, and is also the president of the Trinidad and Tobago National Olympic Committee. He's joined now by the SIGA CEO, Emmanuel Macedo de Medeiros, Katie Simmons, the COO of SIGA America, Angela Smith, the chair of Stoke City Supporters Council, and she's also a former world champion at squash as well. And we also have Afi Sheikh, Stacey Copeland, and Densine White with us as well. They are all SIGA members or champions, and one or two of our panel as well have also played professional sport at the highest possible level. So let's first turn to Emmanuel and say a very good morning to him once again, and he'll bring in Brian to give us a broad overview of what the task force have determined about how to improve integrity in the areas of race, gender, diversity and inclusion. And then after that, we'll start taking some of your questions. So do get involved. You can pose those questions via the app. You can also use the hashtag SIW in order to engage and interact with us on this inaugural Sport Integrity Week. But for now, I'll hand over to Emmanuel. It's a very good morning to you once again, and I look forward to hearing your opening remarks on the recommendations that the task force has concluded.
Thank you very much, Ben, and good morning to you all. It's a great morning here in Lisbon. The sun is shining, and we all feel very enthused and very empowered and ready to do what it takes to move this Sport Integrity Week forward, to achieve our objectives, and to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to give their voice, to give their inputs, to participate, to make their voice heard. Because here at SIGA, everyone has a place around the table. And we value the contributions of all organizations, all individuals who want to put sport integrity at the top. But to put sport integrity at the top, it cannot be done randomly or by accident. We cannot have sport integrity at the top. We cannot even feel proud of ourselves as individuals, as organizations, as nations, if this is not done under the most basic fundamental values. And at the top of it is respect for human dignity, respect for human beings, accepting that we are different in many ways, but equal in dignity and equal in respect, no matter how we look like, no matter the color of our skin, no matter our social background, no matter our gender. To think otherwise is not okay. It's wrong, and it's a sign of weakness. So be the leader that lives in you, be strong, be bold, accept that we live in a new age, embrace all these differences, and let's enjoy the opportunity that we have had. And it is with this strong reformist impetus that we initiated this discussion. SIGA stands for reform. SIGA stands for action. SIGA stands for disruption where it is needed. And this is clearly an area where we need action rather than words. For too long, we have witnessed the problems, and the problems are not getting easier. They're not getting solved despite the grandiloquent proclamations and the promises of politicians and other individuals. We need action, and we need now. And that action is the fusel to meaningful, positive, long overdue cultural change. How can we do this? We can do this if we take action, if we assume our responsibilities. So I want to thank Brian. I want to thank Afi, Katie, Dan Zine, Stacy, Angela, and everybody else who contributed to this amazing discussion around sport and around what sport stands for. An equal field of opportunities for everyone at the top, on the pitch, off the pitch, on the tracks, the entourage, and what we as a sporting industry convey to the world. Let's live the moment. Let's meet the expectations of those who are with us on this Sport Integrity Week. For that, I can only commend the work that this task force has been doing, because they have walked the talk. And they have been working relentlessly, not only to identify the main issues, but action points that can trigger the right dynamics in order for us to achieve results. Sport without values is not sport. It's a shame. And we have to turn this around. We have to come up with the highest integrity standards that will be adopted by all sports organizations. And I hope that you have enjoyed and followed this morning's opening session and the powerful messages that were conveyed, our commitment to action, our resolve to spur dynamics and trigger results, because this is what society demands. We may all have wonderful wishful thinking about what the fourth industrial revolution and the fifth, which is already around the corner, will bring. But unless we are prepared to take our own responsibilities and do what's right to build a fair, democratic, respectful society, which is mirrored by our own organizations, we will not be doing anything useful. So thanking the task force for the outstanding work, for the straight to the point, pragmatic recommendations that were issued. I would like also to encourage every one of those who are listening us and participating in the Sport Integrity Week to join the cause, to raise the flag, to roll up their sleeves and take action by our side. For that, I thank you. We will, at SIGA, take very seriously these recommendations. And by the end of this week, the Council will meet, formally discuss, and decide the course of action. We will review our own internal procedures, not only our universal standards, which provide a roadmap to the wider sport movement and industry, but we will review our own rules and policies, because we want to lead by example. That is one of my commitments, and I would like to express it here. And I look forward to continue this discussion, because this is not a point of destination. This is just a starting point. And for that, we have vibrant, charismatic leaders who are willing to trailblaze this movement forward, to be part of this collective historical moment that we are facing, when civil liberties and human rights are discussed on the streets, on the squares, on the offices, on the schools, on every media platform. This is a unique platform. This is a privilege to live in a time like this. It is a troubled time, yes, a challenging time, full of difficulties and hurdles and prejudice, but it's also a great time to create opportunities, to innovate, and live sport with dignity, with respect, and with joy, as it is its own nature. So without further ado, thanking you again for the invaluable effort, I would like to hand over the floor to Brian, who captained this great team of heroes and Navy SEALs, as I used to say, to tell us what were your conclusions, what were your sentiments after the discussion that you spearheaded with all this great group of men and women from different organizations and different parts of the world.
Okay, so first off, thank you very much to you, Emmanuel, for your kind and supportive and encouraging words. I can say it has been an absolute honor and a privilege taking on this assignment and working with such a diverse group of committed, passionate people from different cultures and different experiences that really speak to the best of us all, and a clear signal, many, as to how true diversity and inclusion should work. The task force really dug in, and I'm extremely proud of the work that we did and the recommendations that we have come up with. I would invite, when I'm finished, that we all, the members of the task force who represent some of us, but not all of us for different circumstances, to share their thoughts. I just wanted to make some quick points on why I believe the work of the task force and SIGA's commitment to the work of the task force was not only historic and not just symbolic, but very important. Racism remains the most common form of discrimination. Recently, I saw a report from Kick It Out where it stated that racism is worse now than it has been. I saw a report from FARE, F-A-R-E. I saw a report from the MLS. I looked at business reports. We cannot avoid the reality that racism, discrimination, whether it is on the basis of gender, ethnicity, disability, race, the color of your skin, age, discrimination is still very much alive. Many of us in decision-making positions know the truth, see the truth, but choose to deny the truth. And one of the things that framed my mind as we worked in the task force with tremendous intensity and support from a number of people was this central question. Can the world sport leaders be trusted? And that's a very important consideration, because the world of international sport still remains a very much Eurocentric, white, older males. Individuals who are as committed and passionate and well-intentioned as they are, but who have never experienced racism or discrimination on the basis of gender or any other form of perceived differences that frame us versus them. We look at the world of sport and we see from time to time unsatisfactory pictures, whether it is monkey chants, whether it is bananas being pelted, whether it is the unequal treatment of and representation of gender in the media. The reality is before us. And the world of sport and sport values, which is supposed to foster unity, equality, solidarity, we are living a fool's paradise. Sport is it is an aspect of society, and what bedevils society will bedevil sport. So in this Sport Integrity Week, the issue that the task force gave itself and searched itself and did deep soul searching to address, one of the things that I was incredibly proud about is that each member of the task force also used the opportunity to look in the mirror. because none of us are without blemish. We all carry within each of us unconscious biases and the prejudices that in doing the work of the task force on race, gender, inclusion, and diversity with authenticity and sincerity, it also required us to bare our souls. So I want to acknowledge each member of this task force. My faith in the world of sport and the world society that we can make a positive difference was reignited with the diversity and the commitment and the dedication and the sincerity of the members of the task force. I would also like once again to thank SIGA, you Emmanuel, you Katie, and your team. It is never easy, let me say this, when you are dealing with an issue that is so emotive as discrimination, because there are also cultural differences. There are language codes. And it is very easy for us all to retreat into our comfort zone of what we believe should be, rather than acknowledging the truth. I'm confident that the recommendations that the task force has come up with will address the issue. Can sport leaders be trusted? And the answer, based on the recommendations, is no. And that it requires an indecisive, action-oriented organization to hold the mirror up to the world of sport on the issue of race, gender, inclusion, and diversity. I'm extremely confident that the recommendations will provide such a mirror. So, in that note, I would hand over to the other members of the task force. Let me just take this moment to acknowledge that because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the entire world is going through a very extraordinary time, difficult time, and I extend condolences to all of those around the world, including here in the Caribbean and Trinidad and Tobago, who may have lost family members, friends, and colleagues as a result of this unprecedented pandemic that has brought the entire world and all sectors of our humanity to its very knees. Thank you very much. And I don't know, I think they said there wasn't any moderator. So who do we pivot to? Is it you, CEO? Is it me, the chair, to say, well, what do we do now? Open the floor?
Brian, thank you very much indeed. We hand back to myself and I'll bring in the other panel members, but also put some media questions. If you have any specific questions to any of our panelists as well, you can pose them via the app. You can also use social media, use the hashtag SIW. I'd also like to commend Brian on being the best dressed person that we've had so far on Sport Integrity Week. I think tomorrow I'm going to need a jacket and a tie. Emmanuel's a waistcoat man. Sometimes he pulls out a sombrero or a hat as well. But Brian's definitely the most dashing person that we've seen so far. Let's bring in Angela, though, first of all, because she can give us a fan's perspective as well as a reaction to some of Brian's words. Angela, a very good morning. Speak broadly about some of your recommendations and then perhaps go on to talk specifically about what you think fans can do to make football more inclusive, whether that's on digital spaces or, of course, when they return to matches.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak, and thanks to Emmanuel and Brian for their kind words. I think I speak on behalf of everybody in the task force that we all learnt from each other and will continue learning. In terms of my own experience, when I started playing sport professionally, I was one of one who started professional ladies squash. And if I'd have felt then that so many years on, I won't say more than 20, but more than 20 on, we were still in a similar position whereby we were having to fight for gender equality as well as racial equality, I'd have been staggered. But as Brian has said, COVID-19 has made the world a different place. And I think the most important thing is that we all can learn as people to look at ourselves and examine, are we happy with the way things are in the world at the moment in terms of equality? And if we re-examine where we are and we're not happy, then we should do things to change it. Certainly the standards that SIGA are setting are important, but they should be from grassroots right the way through to the highest level. And they should make certain that they empower people and people can come back and give a positive feedback as well as being accountable. So that would be my main comment. And I think Afi wants to jump in and say something there.
Hi, thanks, Sandra. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us. It's been great being on this task force. It's been very much an eye-opening experience. I say great, but it's actually quite sad in a way. Quite sad that in this day and age we need to address these issues. There are still many things that need to be righted. But I've learned quite a bit about what needs to be righted and what the state of affairs is. And it's been, yeah, I mean, it's just sad that we need to make these recommendations, really. I think there's quite a few things that we identified in the course of our work. One of which is interestingly more data. I think we all agree that more data was a necessary thing in order to look at the problem in more detail. But in terms of what we have done, I think we've come up with some good recommendations that I would like to think, whilst we can't compel anyone to take them as the law, as it were, but that they should hopefully be taken quite seriously, because it's a serious issue. I think we've all, I mean, working with all these people on the task force, I've heard some incredible stories, and everyone's got an amazing amount of experience in this area. I mean, Angela, what you just described there as being one of one, I mean, it says it all, really. So, yeah, I mean, I think perhaps we will go through some of the recommendations now, if we'd like to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Good morning, everybody. My name's Katie Simmons. I'm a member of the task force and I've helped coordinate it under Chairman Brian's stewardship and leadership. And I think that what I would have to say is that every member of the task force was different and came at this from a different lens. I come at it from a white woman. I think just by looking at our lenses, what we realised was what was united was that we'd all experienced some form of discrimination, whether that was with Stacey when she got the chance to be a champion, you know, in her given sport, and she didn't have the opportunity to lift that belt because there simply wasn't there. And that story, you know, always hits me hard, and I'll let you tell it even better, Stacey, after this. But in terms of the universal standards, they are a living document. We do not profess that they're going to be enshrined and rigid, because everybody's sports governance policies should not be sat in a drawer. They need to be constantly updated as best practice evolves. And one of the things which the task force realised that as our gold standard, we actually did have a mechanism that we would set targets for sports organisations to achieve that diversity in the boardroom. But we need to go further than that now. We need to be bold. And one of the recommendations of this task force is that the gold standard sets actually prescribed percentages in terms of targets for on boardroom diversity. And we think that, to be fair to sports organisations, that it should be incremental over years. So that we've set some recommendations in that front. Those will be coming out once the council rubber stamp them at the end of the week. But year one, a figure that was banded around and agreed on was 25%. Year two, 35%, year three, 50%. But the principle is there. We don't have to agree right now on what the percentages are and what the years, but there is the political will and also the accountability factor. If we do not set these targets with a percentage, there is no accountability. And I think that recommendation is the strongest, the boldest, and I'm sure, you know, I'd like to invite my other members to comment on that also. The other thing which was came out, and SIGA are thinking of a good way and a cost-effective way, because we do not want these recommendations to be any sort of bar, for example, affordability. Sports organisations come in different sizes. Some are large and have big, deep pockets, and some are small. And those small ones, we want to help. So it might be that we develop unconscious bias training as an online tool so that sports organisations of whatever size have access to this. This is important, not just for the boardroom, but actually for the whole of the organisation. It's got to be filtered down, and to build on what Angela said, we need to ensure it's from the very early stages of someone's career, from recruitment all the way up to the top of leadership, so that we can be at the top. And speaking of the top, I'd like to go on to refer the panel to Denzine, who's the CEO of the International Mixed Martial Arts Federation, because he's made it to the top. And I'd like to hear his take on these recommendations.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, I just want to start by thanking you, Katie and Emmanuel, for taking the initiative to create this diversity and inclusion task force. I think the work that has been done by the task force and all the discussions and the exchanges of ideas has been incredible. It's been a privilege for me to work with this group, and I want to thank Brian as well for his leadership. I think the murder of George Floyd has really put a spotlight on racism, and in particular institutional racism. I think a lot of us, a lot of organizations have been in denial for a long time that these issues actually exist. And there's now a real focus on institutional racism, not just in law enforcement, but and politics, but in all areas. And obviously sport doesn't get a free pass. And as someone who spent his life in sport, I've been involved with sport as a competitor at international level. I've been involved in administration of a national governing body and leading that governing body, and now working with MMA as a CEO. And also working with a diversity organisation, Sporting Equals, an English charity supported by Sport England to promote diversity and inclusion. It's really put this issue high on the agenda for a lot of organisations, and I think, you know, it's really the pandemic that has never been dealt with. And I'm really pleased that now that, you know, this spotlight is being shone on this issue, and we are taking positive action. We're not just paying lip service, we're actually taking positive action to make the change happen. I think the universal standards were excellent. I think the task force saw straight away that the one weakness possibly was the lack of targets within there. And I'm pleased to see that those targets in there. I don't know what the percentages should be, whether it should be 25, 30, 40, 50%. I think it's just good that there is something for international federations to work towards. I think there does need to be, going back to what Brian said about can we trust the leaders to make this happen? I agree that we can't. I think there does need to be a little bit of arm twisting. That's why the targets are really important. And I think we don't want to be having this discussion in another 10 years and another 20 years. And I think that's why we need to put things like independent directors, the need for independent directors or non-exec directors within the standards, which I think will speed things up. Because otherwise what you'll probably find is international federations, and I gave the example of my own federation where our directors are now elected for the next 8 years. So that isn't going to change unless someone resigns or dies. The board is the board until 2027. However, we do have non-exec directors which are appointed by not appointed by the board on a rolling 1 year situation. So I think by having including the independent, the need for independent or non-exec directors, I think we can speed up the process, and it gives the flexibility to international federations to start recruiting people onto their boards almost immediately, and that are going to add diversity to the boards. Thank you.
Ben, are you? I would like to hear one of the athletes, super athlete that is part of this task force, and that is Stacey Copland.
Yeah, thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, everyone. I'm not going to speak much to the recommendations because obviously my peers have already done a great job of that. So I'm just going to give you two quick stories that sum up two of my profound experiences as a female athlete in the sports of football, or soccer, as some people might call it, and boxing. I started out in boxing as a little girl, but didn't get to compete because it was illegal for women when I was a child. But I also had a love for football, so I went into football. And I got my first England call up when I was 16 years old, and I was working at the time in a factory in Manchester. And I went to see my boss to get a week off to go and play for the team. And I had this letter from the FA, which I was just unbelievably excited about, as you can imagine, with the 3 lions on it. And I was just so proud. They probably get an email now, but in those days, you used to get a letter. And I took it into my boss and I said, oh, I need a week off, but there's no holidays available. And he said, what do you need a week off for? And I gave him this letter, and I stood there all excited, and he didn't really say much. And then he said, you want me to give you a week off to play for a women's football team? And I said, well, it is the England women's football team. And he made all these jokes and innuendos and supposedly funny things that people say. And in the end, I just said, look, it means a lot to me. Can I just take it unpaid? To which thankfully he agreed. And I walked out of that office feeling very small, ashamed really, and felt like an idiot for thinking it was such a big deal to represent my country, because I'd just learned that I was playing for the women's England football team and not the England football team. And one I quickly learned was not valuable in the same way as the other. And I didn't even question what was said. It just impacted how I felt. I didn't tell any of my colleagues that I was going, any of my friends that I was going to play for England. Now, fast forward 20 years. By then, I'd finished my career in football, and I'd finally got the chance to box. And I'd had an amateur career representing GB in England and turned professional. And I got the chance to fight for the Commonwealth title in Zimbabwe. Went out to Zimbabwe, won the title. It was an amazing experience, but I didn't get a belt. That was bad enough, not having that moment straight after in the ring to celebrate. But I think the worst moment was when I got back to the airport, because I hadn't had the heart to tell everyone there wasn't a belt, and they'd all turned out to surprise me. And not having that moment to share with my loved ones was quite heartbreaking. And so I rang the head of the Commonwealth Boxing Council. That's the professional, not the Commonwealth Games, Professional Boxing Commonwealth Council, and was told that they don't have a belt for women because they'd stopped producing the replica belts, which they give to women, and they do real belts for men. So I was obviously shocked by this. They just said it as if it was just standard. And I said, okay, why is that? And he said, there's more money in men's boxing. And I said, but even if it would have meant paying for it with my own money, at least I could have had that belt. I'm never going to get that moment back. So I said, how quickly can I have a real belt? To which he said, you can have one in a couple of weeks. But they're expensive. So unless you've got a sugar daddy, you probably won't be able to have one. And it's difficult to put into words what those, seemingly to others, it might seem like a small thing, but equally when it's a racist comment or a comment about disability or whatever it might be, it really, what each one on its own might not be that massive, but when they're again and again and again, it can make you feel a certain way about yourself. But this time I was in a position to challenge it, and I did. And they've now created a Commonwealth title belt for women. So the main point of that story is that I've been able to do that as an ordinary person and make sure there's a belt for women in the future. Everybody is capable of making sure that there's something that can be better within their sport or their capacity, whatever their role is in sport. Sport is one of the most powerful things on the planet for bringing about social change, and everything that improves. Look at the NBA, the WNBA in soccer, people taking a knee, speaking up. boycotting games, it will have an impact, and what happens in sport impacts other areas of society. So whether it's the recommendations that you go for, or whether you sort of equate them to what works for your role and your organization, please take this moment. It's a big moment. It's an important moment. We have to seize it. Please do everything that you can to make things better within your industry, because it will impact other areas of society. Don't underestimate what we're all capable of, and please join us, because it's going to take everybody, and we need everyone to step up and be part of it. And I'm grateful to have been able to do that with this group, so thank you.
Stacey, thank you very much indeed. I believe my audio is back. Some might say that I'm better muted, but it does allow me, if you can hear me, to put questions to the panel from, if you like, the floor, digitally speaking. Lots of the media have been in contact. If I could ask the panelists to keep your answers to a minute or so, that should allow us to get 10 or 12 questions in before the end of this opening media conference. Emmanuel, to you first of all. We heard from Stacey a moment ago referencing some of these protests specifically relating to race, and even on occasion during the COVID pandemic, inclusion as well. Sport has shown solidarity with the Black Lives Matters movement. Footballers have kneeled before key games, including in the Champions League final. And maybe most poignantly in basketball, the Milwaukee Bucks boycotted their NBA playoff game with the Miami Heat, which led to then a series of other so-called protest postponements. What role, therefore, does you and SIGA think athletes have in achieving the task force recommendations?
The athletes are the living cells of sport. Without the athletes, you do not have sport. And it's time for athletes to feel free and to be free to express their views, to express their voice, to make themselves heard. Without the athletes, pretty much everything would lose impact. So they deserve respect, and they deserve the opportunity to express themselves. And this is why I joined Brian and others who have been calling for a review of the Olympic Charter, who probably for political few reasons back in the 60s have foreseen this rule that prohibits every sport individual, every sport organization to be vocal about matters of transcendent significance. This is indisputably a matter of transcendent significance. It's urgent, and it's very important that they take the voice. And the reason why they do this is because the current and past leaderships are failing on them. Because if these problems still remain, it's because the global leadership and national leadership has not been acting in accordance with the expectations. So this is a moment not to finger point, not to blame anyone, but it's a strict, a clear call for action, and this action implies to make the rules right, to balance the odds, and to ensure that respect is granted.
Emmanuel, thank you very much indeed. Delighted to say that we've got a late joiner, a straggler to the media conference, if you like, but very much a key voice on this task force. And that over in America is Karen Korb, who played wheelchair tennis, a two-time Paralympian and a 10-time member of the USA World Team. Karen, thank you for joining us. I know it's very early over there. A very good morning to you. I'd like to get your thoughts on this task force, and specifically on inclusion as well, because often that word is bandied around, and it's very important, isn't it, to be specific, to talk about and to provide provisions for very specific groups of people, including, of course, those that are disabled and play sport or are involved in sport. So please give me some of your thoughts in this area of inclusion.
Ben, thank you so much. And I want to just start out by saying thank you to this entire task force and to all of SIGA, because this has been an incredible privilege to be on this task force and to be a SIGA champion, because everything in my entire universe is based around equity. As a person with a disability, I've been disabled for over 30 years. The colleagues that I've worked with respect to what we have had to undertake over the past couple of months, the commitment and the passion for creating equity, not only in sport, but in the entirety of their lives. And we've had some very deep discussions that have at times been difficult, and they will be difficult, but that's what creates change. It became apparent to me very early on in our task force meetings that this was a group of people who really, really recognized the importance not only of racial and gender representation and inclusion, but all of the varying intersections as well. Disability, we often say that the D in diversity is disability. It is not separate. We are an intersection of every identifier that we can ever talk about. And disability is often not talked about. And if it is, it's talked about in a charitable way, which isn't necessarily a bad thing if I spoke in a binary way, good and bad, but it just is. So with the Paralympic movement and the Olympic movement embracing that, we're moving forward. And this task force really, really understands the gravity of inclusion and diversity, not just with respect to sport, but leadership positions. And I trust I answered the question as briefly as I can, and I apologize for my delay.
Karen, thank you very much indeed. It's great to have you with us. I'm sure all of our panelists as well can be reached out to you either via their social media, or if you connect with us, we can give you their emails. So if you have any specific questions to put to any of them, but I don't blame Karen for being late, because of course it is also, and as a tennis player and fan, she would have been watching the US Open over at Flushing Meadows in New York. And there were all kinds of stories last night. You may well have seen Novak Djokovic, unfortunately and inadvertently, hit one of the line judges in the throat, and he was actually disqualified from that tournament. So there's headlines all over the place in Flushing Meadows, positive and negative. But we've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to put quick fire questions to all of the panel, and any of you can feel free to come in and answer these. And these questions have come from media personnel all around the world. And the first one that I've been provided with is from the chief sports reporter of a newspaper out in the Middle East, Vijay Raj. And he has a question which maybe Emmanuel or Katie are best placed to answer, which is in regard to the Middle East specifically. He asked, do you see barriers in the way that gender equality and inclusion will be faced in sport in that region where laws are different?
I'll kick off on that and then give the floor to Katie to complement. There's no point in denying that there are barriers. There are cultural barriers, deep-rooted, long-standing barriers. But that is part of a different culture. Whilst I acknowledge that we cannot see the world from only one lenses, and it's not monocolor, we do need to exist that these cultural differences exist. I'm not here judging, I'm just stating the obvious. But I must also say that in all conversations I had with sporting leaders, with political leaders, with leaders in the, academia and civil society, there has been a great and open spirit to more and more create equal opportunities as a sign of openness, a sort of a positive spring in terms of mind opening to ensure that the role of women is valued and is recognized, and so that they can have a seat on the table when decisions are made. There are important organizations who already reflect that. I am very confident that we'll continue to move towards that objective. And the sooner we do that, the better. I've also recognized the great female leaders that we have across the world, including in the Middle East. And I'm certain that they will also be champions of this cause. And the spirit of the Sport Integrity Week, prevailing as it will also help to boost these culture changes in a positive way. Katie?
Yeah, short answer for me. I think we need to respect cultural differences, but we shouldn't use cultural differences as an excuse not to enhance all of our standards. And I think everyone can look themselves in the mirror and use that. The universal standards are exactly that. They're universal, and they take the cultural differences into account. And that's why they're under 3 different levels, which is bronze, silver, and gold, so that you can be aspirational. But we leave it to different cultures and different countries to adapt the standards to their reality, but they are a benchmark with minimum best practice starting at bronze.
Katie, thank you very much indeed. That's almost all we've got time for. So I'll just throw it back to Brian for a 30-second or so concluding thoughts. And I'll pose to you a question from Maureen Bassong in order to, in some senses, shape the way that you end this, because I know you're very knowledgeable in this area. And she has asked, Brian, that do you think part of the task force's aim is to ensure that integrity in sport is also allowing the relationship between sport and justice and sport and social politics to thrive?
You're on mute.
I believe, unfortunately, Brian is on mute.
Brian, you're on mute. You're on mute. There we go. There we go.
Apologize for that. The sun is coming up here in beautiful Port of Spain. Our vision must be aspirational to hearts and minds. The principles of equality and non-discrimination, they are also a question of human rights. Discrimination, whether it be on the basis of religion, race, gender, ethnicity, migrants, age, old, is rife. As I asked earlier on and in wrapping and closing, can we trust world sport leaders who who talk, but don't live the values of equality and non-discrimination? They say one thing in the public spotlight, but behind the scenes, it is something different. When you hold the light up to International Sport Federation on the question of diversity and inclusion, be it the question of racism. So, the opportunity, the role, responsibility, and duty of SIGA, now that the task force has completed its work and shared its recommendations, is to walk the talk.
Brian, thank you very much indeed. Fascinating discussion, and my thanks to all of the panelists. Like I say, if your question hasn't been posed to them, you can reach out to us and we will certainly connect you. Many of the names that you've seen on the screen over the course of the last 45 minutes will be part of the next 5 days as well. Use that hashtag SIW as well. But for now, that concludes our media conference, and we'll be moving on in about 15 minutes to our opening panel as well. The focus there is on equality in the boardroom. That starts in 13 minutes to be exact. That's 12 o'clock GMT, 1 o'clock CET. SIGA, incidentally, have recently launched a female mentorship program that's led by Katie, who we've just heard from. And the aim is to show young talent pathways into sport and, in the long run, the boardroom as well. And she will be part of that panel. Amazingly and worryingly, a SIGA survey only last year showed that just 18% of female representation in the boardroom amongst the 32 recognized sports federations existed. So obviously, given 51% of the world's population are female, that percentage needs to go up, and we'll be finding out how that can be achieved at both grassroots level and the boardroom in our next panel. That will be moderated by Graziella Thacker. She is the CEO of the Optimization Hub and was also recently named a 2020 IWD Leader of the Year. So please stay tuned for that. It's coming up in only about 10 minutes time, and make sure you engage with us as well on social media. But we'll be back shortly for our first panel. And once again, thanks for joining us for the media conference here on day one of SIGA's Sport Integrity Forum.